Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Bree Buonomo. Hi if you're new here, or hey if you've been here before. Today I'm going to be talking about my 10 favorite reads of 2024. So last year I ended up reading 67 books, but I truthfully didn't have like a great 5-star year, but I also didn't have like a terrible year either. I didn't have a lot of 1 or 2 stars and I didn't have a lot of 5 stars. And I think while I was hoping to have more 5s, a lot of the books that I read had been ones that were sitting on my shelves and things that I was trying to read that I owned. I'm not mad about what I did read. And when I was kind of calculating and thinking about all the books that I read, there were definitely 10 books that really stood out to me this year. And so I'm just going to focus on those and I'm going to share them with you today. And I'm not going to do a top 10 or top list of worst books of 2024 because I just really don't have a lot. So with that said, today we're going to talk about my top 10 favorite books of the year. And this is going to be in no particular order. The first book I'm going to talk about is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett. And I could also include the sequel on this list because I really just enjoyed both of these books. But this one in particular, the first book, really just started my year off strong. We read this for one of my book clubs. I can't remember if it was January or February, but it was the pick that won. And I have this beautiful edition from Fairy Loot, but I also did listen to it on audio. So if you are in the mood for a good audiobook recommendation, this is perfect. This follows Emily Wilde and her companion Wendell. Emily really wants to make this encyclopedia and be the first person to have like documented all of these journeys of the Fae lands. And Fae are relatively like they're known in this world, but not everybody believes them. But it is a really like unique premise. So Emily is a scholar and she ends up on this quest for knowledge and really gets into a little bit of hijinks in the world of fairy. It's super cute. There is a slow burn romance, and while I don't know if it's confirmed, Emily definitely seems to be neurodivergent coded, and I think that's done really well, and it's a really good representation and just a positive highlight. Like I really like Emily because of who she is. Like she's just a really fun and lovable character, and it was just a really good time. It's a super cozy read. I cannot wait for the last book to come out this year. And yeah, if you guys haven't picked this up, it's well worth it. It's a fun time. And like I said, the audio is a really good way to consume it. Next, I read In the Wild Light by Jeff Zentner. This is a young adult contemporary novel that follows 2 kids who grew up in a very small town, Tennessee, and they're both kind of, on the wrong side of the tracks. They have a history of family addiction, and our main character, Cash, his parents are both dead, and he lives with his grandparents who raised him. His grandparents' health is declining, and he gets this opportunity to go with his best friend to this prestigious boarding school. He's really grappling with, like, is this the best decision for him, knowing that his grandparents are in declining health, but also, like, his future means a lot to him. It's just a really good novel. For being a YA contemporary, there's so many depths and layers to this book, and the grappling with like what might be best for us isn't always best for other people, and sometimes because we want to do things that are better for other people, we might limit ourselves in other ways. Like there's just a lot of great discussion in this book. There's also a lot of discussion around poetry, and the author has included some poems in this and they're beautiful. I just really liked this book a lot. Got me really in my feels. It is a heavy-hitting contemporary, but my gosh, it is so worth it. I just really loved this. I loved the lyrical prose. I loved the poetry in it, and I just think the author has a really great way with words that are showcased in this novel. So if you want to be gut punched, I recommend this. There's just so much great representation in this, and it's so well done. Next, I have my copy at work and I forgot to bring it here to do this video, but I read early in the year Strong Female Character by Fern Brady. Fern Brady is a comedian, and I first saw her on Taskmaster UK, and I really just loved her. I just thought she was so fascinating. And then I found out after the fact that she had a memoir, and it was about her autism diagnosis and not being diagnosed until her 30s. And I just thought her book was just very eye-opening and very interesting. I think Fern is a really good storyteller. I also think she doesn't hold back. There's a lot of ugly sides to mental health and neurodivergency that is hard sometimes to talk about because so many things around the mental health have been stigmatized and villainized over the years. But not getting proper treatment or proper diagnoses or not being believed is also an issue, and that is kind of Fern's story and how she ended up not being diagnosed with autism until her mid-30s when she was well into adulthood and couldn't have stability in her life. She talked about her draw to sex work, her draw to comedy, her relationships and how they struggled, her rages that she would have because she would be so overstimulated and didn't know what was wrong with her. So there's just a lot of great discussion, and I feel like if you are somebody who likes to read memoirs, likes celebrity memoirs, or really likes books around mental health, in particular this one is about autism, I think this is a book that is well deserving of a read. And again, I listened to this on audio as well as on the physical book. The audio is read by the author, and she does a great job. I also believe that it is more impactful with how she tells her story. So I really enjoyed it, and I would recommend either reading or listening to the audio. Another book that I borrowed from the library on audio, so I do not have physically, but I am going to include it in my favorite books of the year, is The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. Coming into this video, I realized that this is a very polarizing book. I saw this on a lot of people's worst list of the year, but I just really enjoyed it. I love a good slow burn, and for me this was like slow, but it kept the intrigue the entire time. And while initially I wasn't sure how I felt about it, I've thought about this book more and more throughout the year. So I feel like that's always my indicator that this was worthwhile, that this was a book that I enjoyed and that I would recommend to other people. This book takes place in the Spanish Golden Age and follows Luisa and how she has particular gifts, and she is trying to get in with the Spanish court and kind of save her life. There's a lot of conversation around Jewish culture as well in this book, where because she is Jewish, that could lead her to being taken out, but she also has this gift, so she's kind of covering her Jewish ancestry by using her gift to her advantage and trying to turn her life around and get the fortunes that she needs to live in a healthier and more stable environment. So I don't know. I don't know if I could describe this book better than that, and I feel like I did a poor job with it, but I just really enjoyed the story. I do think this one is something I will read again in the future, and I like that it's a standalone. It's chunky, it's a big girl, but I really enjoyed it, and I don't have much more to say than that. I just think Leigh Bardugo's writing continues to improve and improve with every book that she writes, and I am really happy that she is writing adult fantasy at this point because I think she has found her sweet spot. Speaking of magical plot lines, I've read A Dark and Secret Magic by Wallace Kinney, and I adored this book so much. I feel like I gave it a 5 stars out of 5, even though there is a slight plot point that I am not fond of, but I just think Wallace set out to make a cozy book that showcases her love for the October and fall season, and she nailed it. The vibes in this book are immaculate. I absolutely love all the descriptions and the Halloween goodies and the nods to Samhain and just so much stuff. This is a witchy book that follows Kate, and her mother dies earlier off page before the story starts, and then at the beginning of the story another elder in her coven passes away, and since that mark, weird things are happening. A stranger from her past shows up at her doorstep. weird stuff is happening in the town, and Kate has to kind of decide like to go through with this binding ceremony. But the binding ceremony supposedly will basically make sure that she is stuck being a hedge witch, and that it's supposed to help with the rest of the coven and making sure that the magic stays stable. But the stranger that shows up at her door is kind of saying that that's not actually the case. So there's a lot of family secrets in this. There's a lot of will they, won't they? There's just so many really great vibes, and I really enjoyed this book. The author is coming out with a Yuletide witchy book next, which I love Yule. It's not my favorite holiday, but I do love celebrating it, and I'm really excited for that. So if you are interested in Samhain and Halloween and October vibes, this is absolutely perfect. And yeah, I loved it so much. The only thing, my only gripe, and you know, and this could be a turnoff, would be that there is a bit of insta-love, I believe. Like, that's my feel for it. But because I loved so many other things about this book, this is one of those rare times where I will forgive the insta-love. And it very rarely happens. Insta-love is my least favorite trope. So I have like a handful of books that I have forgiven it. But this was one that I think deserves that forgiveness. So yeah, go read it. Next, I have two arcs that I want to talk about, and these both came out this year, but I did get advanced copies of them. First was The Return of Ellie Black by Emiko Jean. This is a thriller. This book follows a detective who is on the case of a missing woman, young adult. And she was missing for some time, and randomly she shows up on the side of the road, but does not want to talk about what happened. And this particular detective has a history with missing women, as her sister went missing when she was a kid and was never found. So the detective really takes an interest in Ellie and her story and really wants to piece together what happened to her. And while she doesn't necessarily think that it's going to tie to her sister, she feels some kind of responsibility for solving this case and maybe helping anybody else who is out there and missing. And I just found it really gripping. This is Emiko Jean's first adult novel, as well as the first thriller. She previously wrote young adult contemporary, so I'm always interested in seeing people switch genres, but I personally really enjoyed this. I recommended it to a few people already, and I can't wait for them to read it and see what they think. But yeah, I just really had a fun time with it. I don't read a ton of thrillers, so I can't really compare to say like if this is wholly unique. I don't necessarily think it is. I think it kind of follows like your standard like CSI kind of procedure where you have like the detectives going to solve the case and they get a little bit too personal. Like that is like a tried and true trope, I think. But maybe because I don't read enough of these, I just really enjoyed this one. And if you're like me and you don't read a lot of thrillers, then I think that this one could be a new favorite for you. The other arc that I received and really enjoyed was another memoir, and that was Dinner for Vampires by Bethany Joy Lenz. So I'm going to give a huge disclaimer, which is probably me being a weirdo, but I have never watched One Tree Hill, and you're probably wondering, why did I pick up this book by an actress who I know nothing about? The simple reason is I have, as like a lot of people, a very big fascination with cults. And I always find the psychology behind them very interesting, and that mentality that goes into it, like who's susceptible, why they're susceptible, and why cults work. And this actress, while filming One Tree Hill, was indoctrined into a Christian cult and was extremely exploited. And this book was really eye-opening, and I think it's important because we always think of cults as like these big things, like the Manson cult. It has a big name, there was like a lot of big things that were happening. Or like we think of like Jonestown, like those like big things where it's not just one person. But cults can also be pretty small, and that is what Bethany experienced. She experienced a very small and intimate cult, but a cult nonetheless. And I think her storytelling was very well done. I really, like, I wanted it to be fiction so I could root for her to turn her life around, but unfortunately it's real life. So it was hard to read at times, and it really hit me in the feels about how much she had to go through and how much she was like pretty much lying to herself to be okay throughout it all. So I definitely think it is worthwhile, whether you like One Tree Hill or liked this actress or not. I had no connection to her or the show, and I just really found that I was very interested in this story. So yeah, I think it was one of the more interesting reads I had, and since I've been on a memoir kick, that just was one of the ones that I gravitated towards, and I'm happy I did. While not an ARC that I received, I also have another memoir on this list, and that is In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. I watch Books and Lala quite often, and I end up getting a lot of recommendations from her because I think I have a similar reading style to her, and I really like a lot of the books that she reads. And this was a memoir that she recommended, and I, again, really enjoyed it. It follows the author, Carmen, and her history with an abusive relationship, especially an abusive queer relationship, which is important, and she kind of makes that distinction that not enough people talk about it, and it does need to be talked about. And I agree. I think this was very eye-opening again, and also her writing is just so beautiful. Like, I at times forgot I was reading a memoir because of how immersive she made this book. And it is hard to read at times, and it made me really sad and angry, and I had a lot of ranges of emotions, but it ends in a good place. It ends in a happy place, and I'm happy for that, and I'm glad to see that she is doing better and that she wrote this book to share with others. This is another audiobook recommendation. The author does read it herself, and she has a beautiful voice and cadence, and it was a very whole experience to listen to her history and life. So I definitely recommend it. I also read Pet by Akwaeke Emezi and Bitter, and I really liked both of these books a lot, so much so that I have to just talk about both of them because it's just so fascinating. So Pet follows Jam, who is the daughter of a painter, Bitter, and Bitter's husband, and Jam accidentally touches one of her mother's paintings and accidentally pulls forth a demon from a different dimension. And this demon is Pet, and he is on a mission to scourge our world of monsters. And in this case, monsters are people who do bad things. So Jam lives in a world where there is like no evil anymore. People don't do crimes, and that's because these monsters came and purged their world at one point. But when Jam calls forth Pet, that means that there are still things lurking in our world. And because this is a quick read, I can't really say much more than that, but I thought it was very interesting. It was extremely well written, and it was like creepy at times, and it's an interesting horror. Like, it's not a horror that's gonna make me like have nightmares at night, but it is a horror to make me think. And Bitter is just the prequel companion novel, which follows her mother and how her mother discovered what her paintings could do. So I think both of them are just so well done. They are quick audio reads. Also, audiobooks, immaculate again. They're also very short reads to begin with too, if you want to physically read them. But I am going to absolutely look out for this author and other books that they wrote, and I cannot wait to do so because these were a really great way to be introduced to this author. And my last favorite book of the year, which could potentially be considered my favorite book of this whole year and this whole list, because I do think it's been the one I have recommended the most. I've recommended it to colleagues because of the psychology background of this book, and I've also recommended it to people who are just interested in reading memoirs. And that would be Sociopath by Patrick Gagne. This is a book that follows Dr. Gagne's experience with being diagnosed with sociopathy and how complex and hard that journey was, as well as for people who may be considered sociopaths but can't actually get diagnosed with that because that's not really a diagnosis that we have. We have this DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Diagnosing Mental Health Disorders in the United States. And sociopathy is not a diagnosis you can have technically, but it does exist. And it is, like most things, on a spectrum. And Patrick, in her experience, always knew something was wrong with her, per se. Wrong, like she never could get quite like other people around her, and that led her to acting out and having kind of like no regrets when she's doing certain things, especially riskier behaviors, because she just didn't have the same level of feelings as other people. And that left her feeling very strange and outcasted, but also not caring. And because of that, it led her to go down this rabbit hole, eventually get diagnosed with sociopathy, and want to advocate for other people, especially getting this diagnosis in the book, the DSM. So yeah, it's just very interesting. It's a very good read. And while it's relatively long, so sometimes it might seem like for some people, I could see it maybe dragging in some parts, I just thought her examples and like all the things in her life that didn't add up made this just more interesting to me. And that is it. That is my top 10 favorite list of 2024. I had a pretty good year. Like I said, there was a lot of books that were in the middle ground, but overall I found some new favorites, and I definitely found books that I will be rereading in the future. So let me know down below what your favorite books of 2024 was, and if any on this list have now piqued your interest, or if they've been on your favorites either in the past or present. And that's all for me this time. So thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you then. Bye.